Welcome to Automotive EV. In this session, Sanjiv from CHEP will be giving a review of the Battery in Focus group, which was held last week. It's a really detailed and strong presentation. And what I will do now is to hand you over to Sanjiv, and thank you.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. Yes, my name is Sanjiv Takyar, and I am the Head of Innovation, Solution and Strategic Marketing for CHEP Automotive. So, as Peter said, I'm here today to present to you a summary of our latest Battery in Focus, which was obviously a virtual conference that was held last Friday on the 18th of September. But before I go into the details of the last session, I'd just like to share with you just some general details about Battery in Focus, why we do it, and what we've covered up to date, because the session we had last Friday was actually our 9th working group session. So why Battery in Focus? So we set this initiative up around over 2 years ago now, and it's an expert group that works to develop safe, efficient and sustainable supply chain solutions for electric vehicle batteries. With our vision is to develop an overarching approach to sustainable supply chains, including every single element end to end. We realized there was a need to drive standards for an end-to-end supply chain that would support supply chain efficiency, yet not compromise the environmental social needs. To also elevate the importance of supply chain, and specifically as we go through this interesting revolution, to make sure that supply chain is at the center of everyone's thoughts. Allow partners to collaborate so that together we can innovate and mutually beneficial solutions for all the stakeholders involved. And it also provided a grounding for entry points into automotive associations such as CLEPA, SMMT, Gallia, and many others. And as you will see, a big part of what we do is just looking at all the various insights and news as the market evolves, and building collaborative ideas around how we can take that latest knowledge and trends to create a sustainable supply chain. So the scope for the session is very much focused on lithium-ion batteries. It is to serve the demands of OEMs and tier suppliers as well as LSPs, both today and for the future, to get a better understanding of supply chain solutions and what innovations and what focus areas we require for the future, and understand the complexities of a battery supply chain as it develops. Everything from the handling, the certification, through to the transportation, and really try to develop and discuss some cradle-to-cradle concepts. So it was set up not to be just another conference. It is a series of meetings, and it is not there for people to present, but to have meaningful discussions on anything related to battery supply chains. So as I mentioned earlier, the session we had last week was our 9th, and so far we have had 8 sessions. We did meet face-to-face when we started back in 2018, April 2018. But as you can expect, since March of this year, we've had to hold the conferences virtually. So from the outset, we've had some very, very strong participation, and it is going now strength to strength. We started out by discussing some areas around dangerous goods packaging presented by ourselves in terms of recent accreditations with dangerous goods, for dangerous goods and UN 9 certification. We had Kuna Nagel, who have been a strong partner in pretty much every session to talk about the life cycle process related to lithium-ion batteries. And our other strong partner in the whole Battery in Focus setup is PwC Autofacts, who provide market insight data, which again they provided on Friday, and I'll be giving a short overview of that shortly. We then moved on to the next session, which was held in Liverpool in June 2018, whereby we had our first OEM present from Ford to talk about dangerous good regulations and how that affects their supply chain. And then moving on to Hamburg in October, we started to look at areas like digitization, and also had a look at air transportation, which has been a continuous theme as we transition air transportation in terms of emergency shipments and transporting important components intercontinentally is a strong focus area for the future supply chain. And then more recently, so moving into 2019, again, we had a very exciting session, again, looking at further conversations around air transportation, packaging, looking at developing some further working groups to focus in on areas outside battery in focus. And then we also looked at some areas around inbound logistics and expendable packaging presented by Triwall. Moving into the last three sessions, the session we had in Frankfurt in October, we actually had that session at Frankfurt Airport. We did a warehouse tour so we could actually see how batteries were being transported today and getting a real life experience. So even though this was set up as being a conference, we've had some real life experience in the field as well. And then since then, in March of this year, we had our first major battery manufacturer attend from Northvolt and present. And we also engaged Warwick Manufacturing Group here in the UK, who are doing some fantastic research work, particularly on battery end-of-life management. And then at the last conference in July, again, we had Warwick Manufacturing Group present battery reverse logistics. And also we had highlights presented by Peter from the last automotive EV conference that was held in the weeks prior to the battery in focus. So as you've seen, we have covered many topics over the course of the last 8 conferences. And as you can see, we have participation from many industry partners. But of course, we would like more, particularly from OEMs, particularly from the tier suppliers. We have a lot of supply chain and logistic provider representation and industry body representation, but we would like to continue to take this from strength to strength. So moving on to our latest session that we held last Friday, we had again, a very strong agenda. The session is facilitated by myself from CHEP. We had Christoph Stürmer, who probably many of you know from PwC, to present the latest industry research and update. We then had Matthias Krings from Ford to give a viewpoint of a major OEM as they prepare for the electric vehicle ramp up. And Alina from our own market insight team talking about the need for collaboration. We then had Ben from Kuehne Nagel talk about the topic of storage of lithium-ion batteries. And finally, we had our very own Peter, who provided a preview to this week's event of Automotive EV Live. So over the next 15-20 minutes, I'm just going to now give you a very high-level overview of some of the key points that were discussed during the conference last Friday. So the first session was presented by Christoph from PwC Autofax, as he does pretty much in every battery in focus session, give a very detailed outlook as to what is currently happening in the world of automotive EV production, but also to see how is that going to influence us in terms of where we need to focus in terms of setting up a robust supply chain. So to summarize, these were the main points that we covered, and I will go into some of these in a little bit more detail as we go through the slides. But as you've probably already heard during the course of this morning and some of the other sessions, the electrification trend is accelerating, despite all the other effects that we're having, environmental effects that we're having during the course of this year. The legislation and the popularity of electric vehicles is still continuing, and it's unstoppable. Furthermore, in order to achieve the European CO2 fleet targets, we need to achieve as an industry electric vehicle share of 35 to 45% by the year 2030. However, OEMs are struggling, particularly with the on-costs related with producing electric vehicles. So profitability and contribution margins are both under threat. And as they are now due to roll out a fleet of many, many electric vehicles to the volume segment, and the continued challenge of COVID-19, this profitability is a key issue for the OEMs to make them survive this revolution. Over the next decade, we see that electric powertrain technology will continue to maintain its pace. The pandemic will not affect that pace. The amount of investment and time being spent in this very important area will continue. And then looking at the costs, we did Christoph presented a very good breakdown in terms of the cost breakdown of batteries, and looking to see how those costs need to come down and fall further, which will be a further fundamental point in order to make sure that OEMs can remain profitable and remain in business. We also discussed the important element that's on everyone's mind is we understand that electric vehicles is going to accelerate, but when is going to be that magic turning point? When will battery electric vehicles become more economical than the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles? And when is that point in time? The fact is, there is no discrete point in time. It really does depend on the vehicle segment, and also importantly, the power required for that particular segment in terms of the battery power and the range. And battery electric vehicles will become more economic for certain segments quicker than other segments. And again, I'll share some of that data a little bit later on. And then we looked at the customer value proposition. Obviously, we need people to buy electric vehicles. So what are going to be some of those major drivers in terms of how customers will feel in terms of assessing the value proposition related to electric vehicles, and how we need to look at powertrains in terms of the ICEs, the BEVs, the plug-in hybrids, and how the industry needs to reduce the complexity and the amount of variance and make sure that there are core competencies related to each type of segment and each type of variant. And that will need to continuously reviewed and revised to ensure that each segment remains competitive. And as electric vehicle sales are growing, obviously the OEMs are focused on cost-optimized powertrain platforms and a customer-orientated powertrain portfolio that will improve their margins and profitability. So taking all of that data that's been produced at the end of the day is making sure that they have a solid pipeline in terms of remaining profitable and providing customers with the vehicles that they desire. So going into some of those points in a little bit more detail. Firstly, looking at sales, separated between the three major markets of USA, Europe, and China, you can see here three very different figures. If you look at the USA, yes, they had some good growth, so 30% expectation, even with the downturn caused by the pandemic, but it is continuing to grow, and government support measures are still in place, but they are becoming limited. The main growth, as you can see, is in Europe. So you can see there the expected growth of 98%, almost double in comparison to 2019. And again, despite COVID-19, government is still supporting measures with a strong focus, and we're now starting to see the first city bans for combustion engines have also been announced. China is very different. As you see, there hasn't been growth. As you can see, the market in China was far greater. We're sort of playing catch up in Europe and US. So it's, even though slight downturn, that is due to the impact of COVID-19 and vehicle sales, but it is expected with continued financial subsidies that the China market will continue to grow at a steady pace 2021 onwards. If we then move on to look at the important aspect of fleet targets. So for 2030, to achieve the fleet targets, as I mentioned in the summary, we've calculated that globally, we need to be having vehicle sales of between 35 and 45% made up of BEVs and PHEVs. As you can see the trajectory that we're on in the US, in China, and in Europe on the left-hand side. And as you can see, the goals there in terms of where we want to achieve is really being led by Europe. US have prediction as they've slowed down, but again, increase in terms of additional initiatives, particularly in particular states, will drive that further down. But it's a real target, and 2030 is now far less than 10 years away, and to get to 35 to 45% is going to require a major shift in terms of sales and production. The other area we really focused on, as I said earlier, is looking at the costs and the impact this is having both on OEMs being able to produce vehicles and sell them at a desired price that people will actually consider buying electric vehicles. Currently, the additional production cost is somewhere between 3,600 and 10,000 euros of alternative fuel vehicles in comparison to the internal combustion engine vehicle. And looking at the BEV, it's at that higher range, between 8,500 to 10,500 euros extra production cost. And obviously that cost is being passed on to the consumer. So electric vehicles are still very, very high in cost, in purchase cost. If we then look at breaking that powertrain, that cost of the electric vehicle down, it is largely based on the powertrain cost, because that is the fundamental change in the makeup of the vehicle. And the powertrain cost, 80% of the powertrain cost is built up of the battery system. You see there the breakdown on the left-hand side. And then breaking that further down, if you look at the cost of the battery value chain, 16% is down to the raw materials. And then we look at all the other various elements. So the processing, the production of the single cells, the assembly and production of the cell modules, and then assembling those into the battery system itself. So that is where the current cost is coming down. But like I said, in order to make sure that we have vehicles and cost and sale prices that are really going to make them an economic alternative to current ICE vehicles, we need to bring that cost down. So where is that cost down going to come from? We're looking at a decline of, and this is measured in euros per kilowatt hour in terms of what a battery cell delivers. We need to look at a decline, or the prediction is a realization decline from 90 to 68 euros per kilowatt hour. And the majority of that cost reduction is going to come from the actual active materials themselves. However, we did have a guest speaker, a gentleman called Matt Fernley, who's from a business called Battery Materials, who's really focusing on that front end of that supply chain. And there was a clear message from him, is that there isn't enough investment currently and focus on that raw material production and that raw material sourcing. There's obviously a lot of emphasis and research work going on cell design and cell assembly and even transportation, but not enough in terms of that front end activity. So it's something as an industry that we do need to really increase our focus on. Otherwise, we're not going to see this reduction that we predict here. As you can see, the majority of it coming from the active materials. So as a result of those cost reductions, and if we can achieve those cost reductions, we expect that the on cost will be reduced to just 1,500 to 3,000 euros for a BEV by the year 2030 in comparison to an ICE. So we can then, the industry can then sell vehicles at a much more competitive price, which leads us then on to the next question is, when is that turning point? When is that magic turning point that people are actually going to start to look to purchase battery electric vehicles? And as you can see, it is really split up by segment. So looking at the AB budget, the CD volume, and the EF premium sectors between now and 2030 and beyond, you can see there that looking at the different ranges required of low, medium, and long, it's predicted that there are different turning points. And this is based on how people use those different vehicles, how much those vehicles cost, and the whole economics around the battery electric vehicle and compared to ICE. And it's promoted really by, like I said, the two main parameters. So low range requirements and small batteries would explain that a battery electric vehicle total cost of ownership for an AB low range segment will be much sooner. But the second parameter is around the cost, the on cost of high power electric vehicles. So again, explaining that people with who want to purchase a vehicle for premium segment are willing to pay that premium price, as we've seen with the majority of the vehicle launches so far. And then the final area that we touched on, really just to summarize, is all of these different technologies, ICE, PHEV, BEV, even FCEV, they all have a role to play in the future of the industry. But it is now it's now that we have to reduce the complexity. We have to understand the core competencies for each of these powertrains and where they play in the marketplace, so that the OEMs can really focus on delivering vehicles that are going to have strong demand. And of course, reducing that complexity will also help in the consumer make the correct choice. So that was a summary of the presentation that Christoph gave from PwC. Obviously, there was a lot more detail covered in the battery in focus, but hopefully that's given you a good flavor of some of the topics that we covered. The next area that we talked about is the need for collaboration. And that is one of the reasons why we set up Battery in Focus, but we went back and revisited this point. And I think it's a really important point for everybody on this conference today, is that collaboration is going to be the key to tackle today's supply chain challenges, whether it's in the areas of sustainability, so we can jointly meet CO2 targets, whether it's in the area of digitization, so being able to collaborate to get the best benefit from data that we can produce with track and trace solutions and digitization of an end-to-end supply chain. Creating standardization so that we can save total costs, we can save, we can share, we can save in terms of time and the end-to-end cost of the whole supply chain. And finally, in terms of just the whole area of adopting the revolution of electric vehicles, collaborating in order to take that forward. We then had a very brief presentation from Kuna Nagel on the storage of lithium-ion batteries, probably something that's not on the top of everyone's agenda, talking about the increased demand, the request for storage, the geographical focus being in Europe, then followed by the US, and the complexity and the scope of request increasing on an exponential level. We talked about some of the current challenges in terms of shared warehouse infrastructures, the absence of having uniform global standards, and the complex in terms of the processes. And we really did focus in on that point. So understanding that it's fine to request a storage solution, but it requires validation. It requires research into logistics concepts. It requires a number of validation authorities before you can actually implement and go live. So it's not something that's an overnight solution. So where are we taking battery in focus now? What is the future of battery in focus? Well, we are now really collaborating with automotive EV because, as you've seen, it's very, very much linked into this fantastic conference. So the idea is we will schedule battery in focus sessions in the week prior to automotive EV, and at future automotive EV events, I and my colleagues will continue to provide a short update like I am doing today from the event itself. So we plan to hold our 10th conference in December and then the 11th conference in March. We are also expanding battery in focus. So we are looking now to launch in Q4 of this year, over the next 3 months, battery in focus working groups, both in China and in the US. CHEP, obviously a global business, so we have representation in both of those regions. And again, they're very, very strong regions and play a huge part in terms of the EV revolution. And finally, we're now looking at taking a separate, smaller group to look at actually actioning some of the critical areas of collaboration to really drive those forward, collaborate to make some meaningful changes in the industry that will help all of us. So hopefully that's given you a good flavor of what we discussed on Friday. I hope you found that of interest. And look, it's open to everyone. So please do reach out to myself or anyone else from CHEP. We have a virtual booth that you can go through the Automotive EV platform. Please do reach out to us if you would have an interest in joining Battery in Focus, and we'll be delighted to invite you to the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjiv. Great overview. How you managed all that content in half an hour is quite amazing. I really would recommend anyone that really is looking to really understand in detail to actually go to CHEP's booth and request a chat. And if you're able to look to participate in the future, because the initiative was superb from day one, and it's just grown and grown and grown, and the quality of content is absolutely fantastic. So do try to do that. As we're close to time, and the presentation was so detailed, to be fair. I want to thank Sanjiv. I want to thank you all for watching, and you will be seeing Sanjiv a little bit later in the week on a battery lithium-ion supply chain focus. So thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Sanjiv, and we will see each other virtually and speak later in the week. But thank you for today. All the very best.
Right. Thank you, Peter. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.